I went to lunch with an attorney one day, and he said something that really resonated with me, which is a novice lawyer, an entry-level lawyer, a few years out of law school, can be just as effective as a veteran attorney. The difference is that the novice attorney has to be able to work hard, has to want to work hard and learn as much as possible. An entry-level attorney can be just as effective as a veteran attorney if they take the time to prepare. And to date, that's been completely accurate.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Joel Erway here, and welcome to another very special episode of Experts Unleashed. I'm super excited for today's episode because we're going to be talking with Anthony Conte of Ace Injury Law, and super pumped as we continue our personal injury series. And we're going to learn all about what he does, why he does it, and how he helps his clients in quite possibly their most desperate time of need. So, Anthony, welcome to the show, my man.
Joel, thank you very much for having me. I know we only met last week, but I can already tell you're an amazing person. You're doing some great work out there. So happy to be here.
Well, the respect is mutual, man. I'm excited to dive into our conversation here today. So, Anthony, give our listeners a quick 60-second brief introduction and background about who you are and what you do, and we'll get started.
Of course. So I'm a personal injury attorney. I practice in Rhode Island and in Massachusetts. I used to work for a big law firm in Chicago, Illinois, which is where I went to law school. But I didn't want to represent large corporations. I didn't want to use my degree and my knowledge and skills to represent large businesses. And so I founded Ace Injury Attorneys. And we, like I said, we serve Rhode Island, Massachusetts, injured victims for a variety of different accidents: car accidents, truck accidents, slip and fall injuries, pedestrian accidents. And we've been growing over the past few years, and we've had the opportunity to serve hundreds of clients over the past few years. So it's been amazing.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned early on, which I think is really, really interesting, is that when you got started into law, you said you didn't want to represent large businesses, large corporations.
Yeah.
Why not? Like, what about that, just didn't sit right with you, or wanted you to look at other options, other avenues?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And of course, there's most certainly nothing wrong with representing large businesses and corporations and working at big law firms. Of course, the pay is amazing. It's usually a very appealing option out of law school. But for me, I really had to sit back and think about what I wanted to use my degree for. What did I want to do with my life? I'm a people person, and helping others is something that I wanted to do my entire life. And I found myself in a position where, hey, I can use my skills, I can use my knowledge to help other people, to help injured victims, especially in their battles in life. And so to me, it seemed like the most noble way, most noble cause that I can put my efforts toward. And so that's really how it started.
Did you know, how early on in your life did you know that law was the direction that you wanted to head?
I'd say not very early. I knew that I had strong writing skills, strong reading skills. But, when you're a teenager, everything seems like a possibility. Everything seems interesting. At least it was to me. But I really wanted to, I knew that I wanted to go to law school when I was an undergrad at Cornell University. And I had met some amazing people whose parents were lawyers, whose, family had a bunch of lawyers in them. And, it just seemed like an amazing way to, again, use skills to help others. Not a lot of career opportunities allow you to do that, and to also make a living. So I knew I wanted to be a lawyer when I got into school as an undergrad, and I realized that people out there don't have a voice against large corporations, against big businesses. And I wanted to use my skills to be able to give them that voice. And I feel like that's what I do every day, which is so amazing because I wake up every day excited to get to work.
So one of the things that really stood out as you were talking about that is, the fact that you really wanted to help people. Now, what's interesting, which maybe people may or may not know, but when you open up your own firm, and especially when you go on the plaintiff side and you're representing people against, insurance companies or big businesses or whatever, as a trial lawyer, as a personal injury attorney, you are taking on a ton of risk. I mean, a huge amount of risk when you're working with these clients, because it's not like maybe you're different, but from what I understand, they're not really paying you anything up front. It's contingent upon, winning the case. So as you were considering going out on your own, leaving the comfy paycheck of working for, a big law firm and, on the, representing large businesses, what made the risk worth it? Was it more so, your morals and your values of really wanting to help people, or like, how did you take that leap of faith and how were you ready and willing to accept that natural, tremendous risk?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the short answer is that I'm a competitive person. And so the contingent fee arrangement really allows me to compete to the highest level because, again, if we don't win your case, then we don't get paid. And of course, my clients don't get paid and they're not, satisfied. So on a competitive level, that really appeals to me because now I've got a lot of skin in the game. I'm not just charging an hourly fee and sitting back and saying, hey, we're going through the legal process. It is what it is. The results aren't coming. That to me is a little bit scary because then you've got unsatisfied clients a lot of times, and you're charging for something that you're not achieving. So the contingent fee model really, really appeals to the competitive side of my personality. And to answer your question more directly, the reason why it was worth it is because I had skin in the game, right? Every attorney who takes a case on contingent fee basis has skin in the game. They've got they also have an interest in achieving the best outcome for their clients. So that to me is how plaintiff side of the law should be practiced. And most plaintiffs attorneys do take cases on contingency nowadays, and it's a really good model. Clients don't have to come out of pocket for anything. They're not being charged hourly fees, and in the end, you're only charging if you're successful in their case, which is great.
That competitive nature, I think, runs very strong with a lot of personal injury attorneys, and I think that it's really, really important. What I'm wondering is, while you are on the other side of the table representing big businesses, you've got that competitive nature, but you're also building some experience before you go off and you start your own firm. Was there anything that happened, maybe one or two cases or one or two experiences while you were working on behalf of the big businesses that gave you the confidence in saying, I can do this on the plaintiff side and I know it will work? Like, I have full confidence in my ability. Was there anything that happened on the other side of the table that kind of gave you those first couple of indicators, like, okay, this is the next step that I want to take, and I'm 100% confident that this is going to work?
Of course. So when I worked for a big law firm, I wasn't defending injury cases. I wasn't defending the types of cases that I now prosecute. However, to answer your question, I went to lunch with an attorney one day, and he said something that really resonated with me, which is a novice lawyer, an entry-level lawyer, a few years out of law school, can be just as effective as a veteran attorney. And what makes them, but the difference is that the novice attorney, the entry-level attorney, has to be able to work hard, has to want to work hard and learn as much as possible. An entry-level attorney can be just as effective as a veteran attorney if they take the time to prepare. right? We've got a lot of tools at our disposal now as plaintiffs' attorneys. There's a lot of different tools out there. There's a lot of technology that we can utilize to be prepared. So, of course, the idea of starting, my own practice at a younger age was daunting at the time. But what that attorney told me at that lunch was, really in the back of my mind the entire time. I can be just as effective if I'm prepared. I can be just as effective as a veteran attorney if I'm willing to work hard, willing to prepare, and if I care enough about the case, right? If I'm interested enough in the case. And to date, that's been completely accurate.
You said, if I care enough, if I'm interested in enough, right? Then you can go to bat with a well-seasoned against a well-seasoned attorney, trial lawyer, right? Dive a little bit deeper into that. Like, what does it mean? Like, if I care enough, if I'm interested enough, and how does that translate to your clients today? Because I know that obviously you can't take every single case. So when someone brings a potential case to you, a situation to you, what do your first, what are you doing during the first initial exploratory phases of investigating the case and figuring out if this is something that fits your bill and gives you that confidence?
Yeah. Well, there's a few different answers to that question, but the answer that's universal for every client that comes into my office is, A, you will speak to me directly. You won't speak to a paralegal. You may speak to an intake professional, but you'll eventually be routed to me, who does the bulk of the intake. And every time I speak to a prospective client, the first thing that I do is put myself in their shoes. And I know it sounds cliche, but it really helps to put everything in perspective, to put their case in perspective for myself and for a potential jury down the line. Putting myself in their shoes allows me to, A, experience, to a degree, what they've been going through. And it also, invites me to ask the right questions, right, during the intake. Because I want to know more. I want to know what their story is. I want to turn their story into a compelling narrative throughout the entire case. And that narrative is usually a few sentences. And that's what sticks in my mind throughout their case. When I refer back to their case, I always think of that 1 or 2 sentence narrative, which is, the bulk of their case. So that's universal when I do client intakes and when I'm meeting with a prospective client. What's their story? How can I tell this story properly? And how can I be their voice, throughout this case? Then you asked about, what makes a prospective case something that I'd be willing to take on. Of course, there's, logistical issues. There's, whether or not there's insurance coverage available, whether or not the defendant has been identified, whether or not the damages, the injuries that the client has suffered are substantial enough to make the costs and time associated with the case worth it. But again, nowadays, there's really no case that's too small because we have the technology, we have the ability to offer the same high quality legal representation for a smaller case, a lower value case, as we would with a high value case. So those are the things that go through my mind as I'm meeting with prospective clients.
What's going through my mind as I heard you explain that was, you're working with a lot of times clients who might be at the lowest point of their life, some sort of catastrophic accident, just emotionally, physically, and mentally traumatic for them. And I can only imagine that, they are looking for someone that they can trust, that they truly believe will best represent them. You talk about putting yourself in their shoes and getting their perspective. Is there a story or an example, without naming names, where someone came to you and maybe other people didn't take the case because they just didn't see it the way that you did, but there was something that you saw in the case that made it worth pursuing, and it ended up in the positive in the long run. But more specifically, because you saw it differently, because you saw a different perspective. Do you have any examples or stories to share there?
Yeah, of course. It happens all the time. It happens all the time where a client has visited and consulted with multiple attorneys, and for whatever reason, those attorneys didn't want to take the case, and then they end up in my office, and I'm trying to envision a way forward for them, a route to recovery for them. A lot of times, you have to get creative. Okay. You can't just think, okay, is this an easy case to try? Is there a definite, possibility of recovery here? Sometimes you have to get creative, and you have to think of different opportunities for leverage against, the other side. A recent case that just resolved in my office was along those lines. The client had visited multiple different attorneys who declined to take his case. And when he consulted with me, it did seem like a case where a recovery was almost impossible. But again, being tenacious and and sympathizing with the client, I wanted to at least do my due diligence and some investigatory work so that I can do right by the client. And sure enough, about 6 months later, we were able to obtain a sizable recovery for this client, who was really over the moon and very emotional when I told him the results. So all of that made it so worth it. But the point is that sometimes cases are not as clear at the outset as they are once you start developing the case. So if a client's been to multiple attorneys, that certainly doesn't deter me in the slightest. And I'm always happy to, give them that consultation, which is free, by the way, give them that free consultation so that I can do right by them.
Well, go a little bit deeper on what being creative means, because I think people really need to understand that, working with a competitive yet creative, personal injury lawyer is probably in what they need most. And so, what does it mean to be creative? Can you dive into a little bit more examples or give some more insights as to maybe some other examples of what it means to get creative, where other people, defected the case and didn't take it on, but you saw something or you felt something. So explain more of what that creativity means on your side.
Yeah, of course. From a sort of logistical standpoint, being creative could mean identifying certain defendants, identifying causes of action against different defendants that weren't obvious, at the outset of the case. It could mean, pursuing different causes of action that make sense, that aren't typical, in an injury case. But from a client perspective, to me, being creative is figuring out the proper way to tell their story. Again, an injury case always has a narrative. That narrative will be told to a judge, a jury down the line. So at the outset, you've got to figure out what that narrative is, how to tell this client's story, and how to develop their case, right, as they're treating, or as the case is being built, how to develop it properly so that it's effective and that we increase leverage on defense counsel throughout the case. So there's different strategies that we can use throughout a case that are creative, that can create leverage, that can tell the client's story properly, and that make us an effective law firm for our clients.
Well, you talk about telling this client's story properly. How important is that? If you were to rank everything that you do and everything that you've talked about so far of how you build the relationships, how you put yourself in their shoes, how you look at their perspective, right? how important is it to tell the right story of that client in getting the right outcome?
Yeah, it's the most important thing. It really is. It's the most important aspect of my job is telling their story properly. Um, uh, you know, every client that comes into my office, for the most part, is a strong person, and as humans, we can really adapt to any situation. So clients come in, they're significantly injured. They've been, their life has been turned upside down, um, but they're still moving forward and they're still adapting and they're still progressing in life, which I always find pretty awe inspiring. But the problem is that sometimes we have to dig a little bit deeper. And I tell clients, if you put yourself in your shoes before the incident occurred, right? How different is your life today? Because as the months go by, as the years go on, clients again adapt, and the incident seems, and their injuries and the incident may seem, less serious, less severe than it actually is. But once they put themselves in their shoes pre-incident and think of how different their life is nowadays after the incident, that's a really powerful exercise, because they'll realize that, hey, look, my life is much different than before, even from, minor injuries. So yeah, telling their story often requires some a deep dive into how the incident actually affected their lives, and not with this adaptive front that most humans put on, because that's what we need to do to move on in life. So it's the most important aspect of my job, and it's also the best part of my job.
Can you give me an example of an instance where you completed an engagement with a client, it turned into a favorable outcome, and while everybody was happy, they got their settlement, or they got their result, but you realized that your impact meant much more than just that financial reward. Was there an instance that comes to the top of your mind right away that is like, wow, like what I'm doing is far deeper and far more impactful than any sort of dollar value amount that we received? Does anything come right to the top of your mind?
Yeah, it happens. Again, it happens all the time. Fortunately, thankfully, it's such an amazing part of my job. But clients, all the time, I'm surprised when I get results for clients and I tell them, what the results are, and we've been working so hard for months or years to obtain this result. And I had a client tell me just yesterday, right? We had obtained a favorable result, and they were so happy. They felt such a relief at the end of the case, because what they've been dealing with throughout the pendency of the case was so severe, and they didn't know whether or not the outcome would be positive or negative. And once you obtain that positive outcome, it's such a relief, not only financially, but from a stress perspective, from an emotional perspective, right? They have this weight lifted off of their shoulders. So that's such an important part of my job. One instance that's really, really impactful to me that stays with me to this day is I had a client tell me that once her case was resolved and we had obtained a favorable outcome, that my office had restored her faith in people. And at first I thought it was such an amazing comment, and really made me emotional. It made my day. But I didn't realize how much that would stick with me throughout my practice. Right? Oftentimes, clients come into my office and they've been beaten down by the system. Maybe an insurance company is treating them terribly, or the tortfeasor has treated them terribly. They've totally changed their life, uprooted their life, and that changes how they view the world. That changes how they view other people. I feel like in injury cases, it's one of the most potent examples of businesses putting profit over people. And when it happens to somebody, it's very, very apparent. It's very obvious. And that can be very difficult. So at the end of a case, at the end of this client's case, when she told me that we had restored her faith in, I think it was her faith in humanity, that really stuck with me. And it's honestly one of the goals that we strive for every day when I show up in this office.
Do you know what her situation was beforehand? Because to make that statement, restore faith in humanity, she must have been very jaded before this whole transformation occurred. So
Yeah.
what was her situation, or what were her beliefs before? Did she go into any details of why she made such a profound, bold statement?
Yeah. My understanding is that she had tried to resolve things without an attorney. She had consulted, but then when she realized she was getting nowhere, she had consulted with a few different attorneys who didn't want to take her case, like we were talking about earlier. And then she found me. And the fact that she was able to not only, speak to me as much as she wanted, but to text me on a daily basis, and to be in constant communication as we were investigating her case, I think was really important to her, because that responsiveness is what you're looking for when you're uncertain about what's going to happen, to your life, really. So being able to speak with me and to have an attorney that was willing to take her case and to prosecute it to the fullest extent, without any fees, without any hourly fees or upfront costs, and only on a contingent basis, to her, I think was, it meant the world to her.
Do you find that comment from your clients pretty common, like being able to have that access to you? Because I feel like that's got to be a pretty unique differentiator that separates you from maybe some of the other, big national firms or, larger firms that have these big teams. And is that a common comment that you get from your clients?
It is. It's very common. And that's not to say that larger firms, larger injury firms, can't produce similar results. But I find that, my clients prefer to be able to speak with me directly. And if you're somebody who, wants to get updates on their case, they want to maybe be involved, in their case development to some extent, then choosing a lawyer who you can communicate with frequently is probably the best option. If you want to be a little bit hands off and have the firm take care of things, of course we'll do that as well. But I think for some clients, there's a lot of appreciation for the personalized attention that they receive from my practice.
When you started your firm to where you are now, how have your views on personal injury law changed? Like when you first entered the space and you opened up your practice, you probably had some initial core beliefs or views on what life was going to be like, what the industry was going to be like. And now that you've been in it for some time, what were those beliefs and how have they changed over the course of the existence of your practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing that comes to mind is when I first started my practice, you always think of, hey, defense counsel, they're the bad guys. They're super competitive. They're the ones that are stepping in the way of justice for my client. But as my practice has developed, I've realized that defense counsel is just doing their job, right? And most of the time they're astute attorneys, and very well respected in the legal community. They just have a different job than I do. So how does that change my practice? Well, looking at defense counsel as, attorneys that are just doing their job and they're defending their client, they're defending the insurer. That changed how I practiced fundamentally, because it changed from, the idea of I'm competing against defense counsel and I need to win every single time, to how do I sell this case? How do I build this case properly, right? To convince defense counsel, to tell their client that they need to offer a good result here. How do I sell this case to defense counsel? How do I convince them that a jury would find, in our favor, and give them the tools, give them the documentation, right? Give them the records that they need to go to their client and recommend, a favorable outcome. So that changed how I practiced from a fundamental perspective, and it's certainly served me well.
What do you want to be known? How do you want your firm to be known 10 years from now, right? Ace injury. If someone, is walking down the street and they ask them that question, hey, what do you think about ace injury, right? And they happen to be a former client of yours. What would you hope their words would be coming out of their mouth?
Yeah. Well, it's a very, very good question. I think the most important thing to me is that when somebody references my practice, when somebody references me and my law firm, they think of a law firm that is compassionate and really cares about their clients. Now, again, I know that term is thrown around in the industry. It's very cliche, but I'm part of this community, right? I'm a lifelong Rhode Islander, and of course, Massachusetts is right over the border. I'm part of this community, so when I represent clients, I know that there's a very good chance that I'm going to run into them on the street, that I'm going to run into relatives of them, out in public. And so I want them to be able to say, whether or not I obtain a good result for them, which of course I'm fighting, I'll fight for, tenaciously. I want them to know that, I'm a good person deep down, and that I'm compassionate, and that I did everything possible to obtain a favorable outcome for them. So really that's what I'm sort of, those are the building blocks of my law firm, is compassionate representation for every client that comes across our office.
Well, you talked about how compassion and care are cliche terms that are thrown around in in the industry. So if you had the opportunity to explain to someone a little bit more detail of what compassion and care means for you, I know you've already explained it a little bit, but maybe give us a different perspective or a different example of how you really exemplify what that means as it comes to a personal injury lawyer.
Yeah, I think when I say compassionate and being sympathetic toward clients, it's not just it's not just words, right? It's do I have to stay up until 2 a.m. that night to work on their case, to prepare more, to put every last ounce of effort I have into a pleading, or into a preparation for a mediation. And again, it means putting myself in their shoes to see what they would want from an ideal attorney, right? What I would want from somebody who is representing me in an important injury case. So again, when I say compassionate, it's not just words. It's I like to show it through actions. Am I staying up late? Am I working as hard as I possibly can? Am I putting myself in their shoes? Am I being creative in developing their case? Am I treating them like a client and not just a file number? That's super, super important to me, and that's what I mean by when I say, am I being sympathetic or compassionate toward clients?
Got it. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I think it really helps for people to see the work that goes on behind the scenes. You talk about staying up till 2 a.m., working on, working on a case or a big meeting or, something, a big milestone that's happening throughout the case. How often do you feel your clients are aware that that is the type of work that's being put in? I mean, is that publicized with them? It's like, hey, I was up until 2 a.m. last night, or I was up till, we spent 60 hours, these are not your words, by the way, but we spent X number of hours last week working on your case. How often are your clients kind of seeing that work that's being done behind the scenes, or are they just kind of oblivious to it?
I think that they know it deep down. Right. I'm not calling them and saying, hey, look, I spent, a ton of hours on your case yesterday. I'm wiped out. Right. But I think they know it deep down because of how prepared we are, and how successful we've been in serving clients. So, some clients may not understand what happens behind the scenes. Of course, if they ever ask, I'm super transparent with them. But I think that's how it should be, right? Clients should be focused on healing. They should be focused on getting back to normal life. And they should be focused on themselves, right? That's why they hired me to prosecute their case. They're putting their trust in me to prosecute the case to its fullest extent and to obtain the most favorable outcome. So when a client puts their trust in me, they don't have to check in. Of course, if they do, I'm happy to give them updates, whenever they, and of course we do periodically update clients. Some clients like to check in more often, and I'm totally fine with that. Other clients, put their trust in me, and I think they know deep down that I'm doing everything possible to obtain the best outcome for them. So that's what I think.
How do your best clients currently find you? Is it mostly referrals? Is it, through marketing efforts? How are people finding you right now?
Yeah. Well, it's most of my practice, I will say, is word of mouth, previous clients, which honestly is such a big compliment, right? When a prior client refers, one of their family members or one of their friends to my office, that is such a big compliment because I know that I did right by them. And again, like I said, that's probably the bulk of my practice right now. There's a lot of injury firms out there who have a lot of money, a lot of private equity money, and the funding to be able to, mass market. That's not us. And that's not what we want to be either. Like I said, I like a more personalized approach in my practice. We're not a machine, right? We're not just and again, you won't be just another file number. We want it to be personal. We want it to be, we want you to get that personalized attention that you deserve as a client. So that's how we differentiate ourselves from some of the larger firms that have way more funding than my firm certainly has.
Yeah, that makes total sense. What has come across very clearly in our time here together is how, number one, competitive you are and why you need someone who is ultra competitive to be on your side when representing, your personal injury case or claim, but also combining that competitiveness with compassion and care from the lens of somebody who can truly put themselves in their shoes. And that combination, I think, is what has clearly made you, so successful and has gotten you all this momentum that you've currently built. And it's really a breath of fresh air because you really don't know what you're going to get when you go out and search for a personal injury lawyer.
Yeah, sure.
There's a wide breed. There's a lot of different folks out there.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Very true.
And so, Anthony, where can people reach out to you? Where can they find you? Let's drop some links and get you some eyeballs.
Yeah, of course. aceinjury.com is probably the quickest way to book an appointment with me personally. You can submit a form on our website. You can book directly into my calendar for a free consultation. And of course, our phone number is staffed 24/7. So whenever you want to reach out, there's multiple ways to do it. You can DM me on Instagram or message me on Facebook as well. So there's multiple ways that you can reach me. I'm always here.
Awesome. Anthony, is there anything that we left out that you wanted to make sure that you shared before we wrapped up?
No, I think we covered everything, Joel. Just want to say that, again, thank you so much for this opportunity. I hope this reaches prospective clients. And if anybody has questions, if they have a case that they'd like me to review, I'm certainly here for you.
Awesome. Anthony, I appreciate it, my man. Aceinjury.com is the website. We'll drop those links in the show notes as well. And if you are interested and you need to reach out to Anthony, please let him know that you found him on Experts Unleashed. We'll talk to you on the next episode.
Thanks so much, Joel.